Hello, fellow Bible students. This is a video in the series called The Last Days. We've taken some weeks off. Our Zoom group, where we meet every week to talk about these things, we're a small group of friends, and we take off when there are personal things come up and things like that. So we've been off a couple of weeks. Probably maybe 3 or 4, I'm not sure, but we're back, and I am going to ask some questions that I want you to think about before next week's. And not only that, next week's meeting on Tuesday night. This is a homework assignment. I want you to look up the scriptures that answer these questions. I think you might be surprised. So far, let me go over to my playlist on my YouTube page and just kind of review what we've done. The very first video was an introduction. It kind of talked about what we're going to discuss in the whole series. The next video was the question, are we on a 7,000-year timeline for humanity? Then we had the Antichrist Part 1 and the Antichrist Part 2. And so basically what we talked about there was the first one was what the Antichrist army might look like. And then in the Antichrist Part 2, we talked more about that. We looked at the possibility of what nationality or religion the Antichrist might come from. And then the next video, we talked about, are we really in the last days? And we talked about the passage where it talks about the fig tree and how that when it begins to put on its leaves, I think that says something about the leaves, and we'll know that is the time when Israel becomes a nation again, and then supposedly it says that's when we'll know that the end of time is near. So I talked about that and my struggles with believing that that's what that meant. What I didn't mention is that, I don't think I did, I might need to go listen to it again, is that there are lots of passages in the Old Testament that talks about when Israel becomes a nation again in the last days. So the fact that Israel is back in their own land again is extremely significant for us in identifying the last days. But that specific passage that we talked about, I struggle with seeing that as an indicator, but I could be wrong. So the next video, and this is the last one we did, was about Ezekiel 38 war. Could it begin any day? And I went through I read very large sections of Ezekiel 37, 38, and 39, and gave my opinion on whether or not the Ezekiel 38 war could be very soon. Okay, so that gets us up to where we are now. And what we're going to talk about next week is the actual timeline for the rapture and the Antichrist to take power and things like that. So what we're going to discuss, let me get a drink. We're going to look at all of this from the point of view of the Pre-Trib Rapture. And the reason we're going to do that is because that is what most of the people on my friends list believe. And, I have done a couple surveys and asked that question, so I'm pretty confident. And my friends list on Facebook is pretty small. I've narrowed it down to just the important people. So it's like 450, something like that. But I'm fairly confident that the majority of my friends on my friends list do believe in the pre-trib rapture. I do know there are quite a few that do not, but we won't go into that. I'm just speaking from the point of view of the majority tonight. And we are going to look at the other theories on the rapture, but we are coming at it from the pre-trib point of view. And I did talk in an earlier video about, I think it is Lifeway did a survey on, a large number of people and found that of all of the Christians, that 30% of Christians believe in pre-trib. And actually, I think this survey was of Christian pastors. Only 30% of them believe in pre-trib. 30% don't believe in a literal rapture at all. And then the rest of them were split between post-trib, mid-trib, and a few other things. So I found that quite surprising. Although I do know a lot of churches, I believe, don't even teach end times or the rapture. And I find that shocking because a huge portion of the Bible is about the last days. So I don't know how they can preach or teach the Bible and not cover that part of it. So what I'm going to do first right now, I'm going to give you a pre-tribulation general timeline. Now, if you are pre-trib, you may not agree with this exactly. I'm just trying to get a general timeline. And I was raised pre-trib. My mother taught the Bible, my mother taught Revelations, and she believed pre-trib. And I was raised Assembly of God, and I believe that's what Assembly of God believes. So here is a general timeline. So I'm just going to, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 points. So I just want you to listen carefully. And I have all of this typed up, and you can access it from a document, a link to Google Drive in the comments, excuse me. Okay. The very first item is the rapture of the church takes place. The next one, a 7-year tribulation begins. The third point, the Ezekiel 38 war happens, or it could possibly happen right before the rapture. The fourth one, the Antichrist starts taking over soon after. I don't believe he reveals himself at the very beginning, but he starts moving into position and controlling some things. The next one, the seals of Revelation start happening. Remember, the first seal is the white horse, and then there's the 4 horses, the seals. And then the 5th seal is the martyrs, and the 6th seal is all kinds of crazy stuff starts happening. So the seals of Revelation start happening. The next point, halfway through the 7-year tribulation, the Antichrist desecrates the temple. There's the abomination, the desolation, and he says he is God. The next point, the mark of the beast happens at some point in this 7 years. Next, the trumpet and the bowl judgments happen somewhere in this 7 years. Next, at some point, the 2 witnesses appear, and I believe most people believe it's at the halfway point. And then the last, Jesus returns to judge sin and begin the 1,000-year reign before God comes to live with us. Now, when Jesus returns to judge sin, well, okay, that's the end of the 7-year tribulation, according to the pre-tribulation general timeline. So if you're pre-trib, I may not have this exactly like you believe it, but I believe this is a pretty accurate general summary. Now, what I want us to do is to be Bereans and test the scriptures and test what has been taught. Now, remember, that's what Paul told us to do. And the Bereans were a group of people who studied the Bible faithfully. And they looked up the scriptures. They studied the scriptures and compared everything Paul said to the scriptures to see if he was teaching the truth. And so this is what we're going to do about rapture theories and the general timeline. And we're starting with the pre-trib, and we're going to answer some questions. I have a list of questions, and by answering them, I mean we're going to answer them with scripture. And if there is no scripture, then we're going to put a question mark whether or not that is in the timeline. We're going to apply the scripture to the timeline, to everything. So here's the list of questions. And I'm not going to go over the answers in this video. We're going to go over them in the next video. But I want you to participate, and I want you to try to answer these questions and find the scriptures that support your answer. So the very first question is, does the Bible say when the rapture takes place in relation to the tribulation? What is your scripture reference? The next question, is there a 7-year tribulation scripture reference? Is there a 3.5-year tribulation? If you don't believe in the 7-year tribulation, what is your scripture reference? The next question, does the Bible say when the Ezekiel 38 war takes place? And as I mentioned, we already have a video on that, but you can provide scripture reference for that as well. The next question, the next 3 questions. At what point does the Antichrist appear? At what point does the Antichrist say he is God? At what point is the desolation and the abomination? If the Bible indicates a timeline, or any good information about these, please provide your scriptures. The next question, does the Bible give us a time frame for the mark of the beast implementation? Where would that be found? Do the seals of Revelation start after the 7-year tribulation starts? What is the scripture reference? If they don't start after the 7-year tribulation starts, when do they begin? Scripture reference, please. Are the seals and then this kind of goes along with the other question, but this will maybe help you refine it a little. Are the seals in the first half of the tribulation? Are they in the second half? Or are they spread throughout the whole 7-year period? Or does the Bible even tell us at all when the seals begin and take place? Scripture references, please. 2 more questions, sort of. When do the trumpet and bowl judgments take place? Within the 7-year time frame. Are they consecutive, like all of the trumpet judgments and then all of the bowl judgments? Or are they simultaneous? Are they kind of happening at the same time? Scripture references, please. And the last question, maybe, does the Bible give us a time frame of the 2 witnesses? And where would you find that in the Bible? And one last question is, if you do not believe in a pre-trib rapture, when do you think the rapture will take place? When do you think, now let's see, let me add these in. When do you, I'm going to do it or I'll forget, think the rapture takes place. When is the wrath of God upon the earth? And let's see, what's one last question I could ask? How long? One last question. Does the wrath of God last? And scripture references for all of these questions if you have them. So that's it. So that should keep you busy until next week on Tuesday night. Yeah, today's Tuesday. Okay. So I think these are some good questions. Now, if there is anything that you have a question about that I did not put on here, please message me or just go ahead and write out the question and the scripture reference and send me that. Or we will see you in the Zoom class if you usually participate there. So that's all I have. And thank you all for being patient while we were out of commission for several weeks. And I will look forward to next week and seeing your answers. And I look forward to our discussion. I love you all. Goodbye.